Thanks, Ashley. That was a wonderful introduction, and it is, for me, a real honor to be on this panel with two remarkable women. In a nutshell, Sheila Bronfman, I have come to learn over the last 20 years, is a true force of nature, and has become a dear friend. And journalist Brenda Blagg captured in her book a unique story in American politics, and a story that has an awful lot to do with New Hampshire. So whether you're a veteran, and I see some here, of the '92 New Hampshire primary, a lover of the primary, a Clinton fan, or someone who's interested in grassroots politics done the old-fashioned way that really works, I strongly recommend you get her book and read it. I'd like to add one more thing about me to Ashley's introduction, and that is, even though I'm from New Hampshire, I am an Arkansas traveler. I had the privilege of spending 8 fun-packed days under Sheila's command in East Texas for Hillary Clinton in 2008, and there's some other New Hampshire residents who are Arkansas travelers in the audience, and I'm just going to ask them briefly to raise their hands so that you may be seated next to one and you can actually talk to a real Arkansas traveler.
Where's George?
Or yeah, George is here too. I want to briefly I've been asked to briefly set the stage because there may be people in the room that weren't alive in 1992. There's certainly people in the room that probably don't remember the 1992 campaign. It was very different from the recent New Hampshire primary cycles. One thing that was very different is we had an extremely popular president. George Herbert Walker Bush is at one point, in a couple years before the election, his popularity was over 90%. And as a result, a lot of the big names in the Democratic Party decided not to run, and that included Mario Cuomo, Bill Bradley, who later ran for president, Al Gore, who later was vice president, and Dick Gephardt, who was Speaker of the House and ran for president in future years. They all decided not to run. Bill Clinton did not announce for president until October 4. Third, okay, excuse me. That won't be the first time tonight I'm corrected, I'll tell you that right now. And then he immediately came to New Hampshire afterwards. But October 4, the primary that year was in February 18. When he first came to New Hampshire, listen carefully, he was at 3% recognition here, not 3% support. 3% of the people knew who he was. Senator Harkin from Iowa, who's still in the Senate, was a candidate for president that year. So all the other candidates decided not to contest Iowa. So it was very different than our recent primaries. And frankly, New Hampshire was make it or break it for Bill Clinton. He had to do well here, and if he didn't, he was pretty much going to be done. Other candidates in the race were Senator Bob Kerrey, who recently ran for the Senate again, Governor Jerry Brown of California, who is currently governor of California again, the late Senator Paul Tsongas, who was from next door in Massachusetts. Massachusetts candidates generally do very well in the New Hampshire primary, and Governor Wilder of Virginia, one of the first African-American candidates to run for president. And then now, of course, we have an African-American president. So the big guns were out in the Democratic Party. President Bush was very popular, and the press almost right away dubbed the Democratic field the Seven Dwarfs because they were pretty much unknown and didn't have a lot of stature in the eyes of the national media. Back then, the primary was later, as I said, the candidates, this is very quaint, the candidates actually went home for Christmas break. Spent about
I did.
7 to 10 days, right? Back in Little Rock or wherever they were from. And when the campaign resumed right after New Year's, Governor Clinton shot to the top of the polls, which was quite unexpected. He was not that well organized. He had a small staff, hadn't raised a ton of money. A couple of his Arkansas friends came up and helped us open the office in October, but that was pretty common to have people from a candidate's home state come and help get them started. And it was a different world, and Sheila will probably talk a little bit more about this, but for you young folks, there were no cell phones. The first flip cell phone I ever saw was in George Stephanopoulos' hand. He was on staff. He was 33 years old. I had never seen such a contraption before. There were no emails, no scanning, only faxes. Yeah. I used to meet the governor's plane when it would land here at Manchester Airport with all the local newspapers, which he would grab and devour. Because there were no iPads or anything to read anything on the news, so they were sort of in a vacuum. But in early January, our campaign had no idea about what was going to happen in a matter of weeks. First, Governor Clinton was hit with allegations by a TV reporter, nightclub singer, of an affair she alleged that she had had with him, which he denied. Then a letter was leaked. It's still not known, I think, by whom, from his draft board that he had written, which created an enormous stir because back in those days, having tried to avoid the draft during the Vietnam War was considered a very bad thing for a political candidate, and that took over the news cycles. His lead evaporated almost overnight. He was literally falling like a rock in the polls. He had press conference after press conference where he's asked the same questions again and again and again about the TV reporter or about did he avoid the draft. It was a horribly cold and snowy New Hampshire winter. Governor Clinton got the flu. His character was clearly the major issue in the campaign by this point, and his candidacy, frankly, was on the ropes. I have to say, and maybe others remember this differently, but as a co-chair of his New Hampshire campaign, I don't recall much fanfare or even an announcement about the Arkansas Travelers coming. But we all, including the candidate, felt incredibly beleaguered. He clearly felt his campaign was hanging by a thread. The next thing we knew, it was like the cavalry arriving in an old Western, and just in the nick of time. After we saw them, the Arkansas Travelers, all 137 of them, we didn't see each one of them all the time, but we saw them in action. We saw them going door to door. We saw them interacting with the candidate. He was taking strength from them. In turn, we took strength from them. We suggested, frankly, that instead of having New Hampshire politicians introduce, which is a traditional way, introduce candidates of their choice, like local mayors or leaders in the House and the Senate, or even the governor introduce candidates. We suggested that people from Arkansas who had known him for decades introduce him in main part, because his character was then an issue. And they were able to vouch for his character and his leadership in Arkansas. They went door to door for him. They were highly effective because they knew him personally. It worked. The Travelers played a crucial role in Bill Clinton becoming the comeback kid, as he proclaimed himself to be, on primary night. So, and ultimately, as we all know, President of the United States. So I'd now like to turn it over to Sheila and then to Brenda to tell you how it was done, how Brenda went about writing the book, and then we have a remarkable, remarkable comments that President Clinton made just in this last January in Little Rock, this video has never been seen by any other audience except the live audience that night. And if there's time after that, we will have some Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, then to Brenda.
Thanks. Ashley, thank you. Brenda and I want to thank all of you for having us here. When I first came to New Hampshire in 1992, I was welcomed by Terry, John, George, Risha, Alice, Nancy, all of these friends that were the local steering committee. And we made friendships, forged friendships that have lasted all these years. And the reason there was no fanfare when we came is because the young staff could have cared less that we were here. They really weren't excited to see a bunch of old people come in and start campaigning, and they were like, who are you, what are you doing, get out of our way. So there wasn't any fanfare, but the local people helped us greatly, took us in, told us where to go and what to do, because they were very frustrated. The campaign did begin to see our worth as we went on. New Hampshire holds a special place in my heart because of all that time I spent here and because of these people and the relationships we've made. But my husband and I came early on this trip just so that we could see New Hampshire. I spent a month here, but we got to see it without going door to door and without standing on a street corner holding a sign and asking somebody to vote for somebody. It was very different. It was also October, and I didn't have to bring all what we call our New Hampshire clothes and boots and things here, which everybody in Arkansas now has. Anything they talk to, it's New Hampshire clothes. So I met Bill Clinton in 1976 when he was Attorney General of Arkansas. And a year later, I attended his announcement for governor. And he's incredible. He remembered my name, called me by name, looked into my eyes, shook my hand, and asked me to volunteer on his campaign for governor. I took it as a personal invitation. I didn't realize he was saying the same thing to 100 other people that day. So he's very good at doing that. Bill and Hillary became my friends, and when I got married, Hillary hosted my bridal luncheon at the governor's mansion, and Bill was one of the officiants at our wedding. So it was quite fun. There's a little background on the travelers I'll give you. When the campaign began, we had a lot of people in Arkansas who wanted to do more than just give money and volunteer at the headquarters. So they were very politically astute people. And they could take off every now and then to travel, but they couldn't do a day-to-day take off and work in the headquarters all the time. So I remembered that there had been a group, and this is going to take you young people even further back, called the Peanut Brigade, that Jimmy Carter had his friends had traveled for him. And I tracked down a woman named Dot Paget, who had run that organization for Carter. And I asked her advice on setting up something similar for the Arkansas people. She said that the Peanut Brigade had traveled in buses and cars, and that she suggested we travel in vans to make better use of our time and give us a little more flexibility. She also told me that she wished she had been more in control and more of a dictator. That worked beautifully for how I operate. So I thought, okay. So a couple of us took that to the governor, and he thought it was a good idea, and the travelers were born. We were a very diverse group of 521 people who covered 32 states in 92, 4 in 96, and 4 in 2008. The ages ranged from 19 to 80. And the 80-year-old outworked us all, and I'm not kidding about that. They were young, old, black, white, straight, gay, made up doctors, lawyers, teachers, farmers, business owners, beauticians, clerical workers, and students. We shared a common interest in politics and in good government, and we just happened to have a good friend who was running for president of the United States. We all knew the governor in one way or the other: kindergarten friends, school friends, Democratic Party friends, lobbyists, state government folks in some way or another. And then Terry took my little part here, but I have this cute little thing, so I'm saying it anyway. When we started out, we used an MAP instead of a GPS. So we had payphones instead of cell phones, typewriters instead of computers, snail mail instead of email, notepads instead of iPads, and a handshake instead of a tweet. And then along the way, and this is all in the book, we got lost in Chicago, lost in the National Forest in New Hampshire, lost in rural Iowa. We survived vans without heat in New Hampshire, vans stuck in the snow, New Hampshire, flat tires, Texas, fender benders, Texas, speeding tickets, South Dakota, California, and Colorado. And fires in our hotels, twice in New Hampshire, once in Georgia, and once in Texas. So in rain, sleet, and snow, we were chased by dogs everywhere, Terry especially, greeted by felons and naked men. Here and in more other places than you can possibly imagine, they came to the door. So it's true. It's all true. We ended most days frozen, sunburned, tired, with sore feet, but we did call it political camp for adults, and that's exactly what it was. I had all of these travelers, really their commitment, and I had their promise to work hard. I also had, as part of our rules, their credit card number, their social security number, and their date of birth, because nobody went anywhere unless I booked it and had all their information. And the important point of the reason I had all this is that all these people paid their own way. We paid for everything that we did. The campaign did help us out, sometimes with van, it's not always with gas, but we'd get part of it. We had rules. I book your hotel and your flight. You get assigned to a van. You don't get to pick. Go with the flow. Only your leaders have the schedule, and they change frequently. We don't eat often, so if you need food, bring it. That was a biggie, because you don't have time when you're working a cafe to stop and pay and get coffee and all that. You've got to go work it, but you don't have time to eat. The van's going to be your home for the next 4 or 5 days, and the people in it, your family. At our 20-year reunion that we had in January, one traveler sat, and I have these rules, and a lot of you have seen them, sat and read these rules out loud and said, "Can you believe we paid to do this and we liked it?" So, and I wore this whistle, which I blew often, and it became the call to gather up and go, and nobody ignored it when we did, and the few that did got left, and we did leave some, and there's some great stories about where we left them. When we hit a town, we had a press release, a fill-in-the-blank press release, because remember, we didn't have email, anything like that. So we had a photocopied press release, and you fill in the name of the town, you fill in some local person. We'd go to take a Polaroid picture in front of some setting that people would recognize, and we would take it to the local newspaper. Much easier these days with smartphones and email. We wouldn't have any of that problem. We had very physically and mentally demanding days. And so people got irritable. Imagine that they could get irritable. So each van leader would carry a sign, and it would say, "Bill would do it for us." Well, a lot of times what the people were doing, they would look at me and go, "No, I don't think so." Well, I'd had Bill sign this other one and said, "I'd do it for you, Bill." So we'd just flip it over and give, show them that, and they'd sort of get going. It was very good for morale, to going. Ultimately, we brought 137 travelers to New Hampshire to work as travelers, vouch for Bill, and lift his spirits. We made politics personal, and we used the art of persuasion and grassroots politics and the strength of a common purpose to reach our goal of electing our friend as President of the United States. Now, I have a couple of points about our time in New Hampshire. Your state is very cold in the winter, extremely. Our guys thought they were prepared when they came with all their duck hunting gear, but we discovered that waterproof and water resistant are not the same thing. It's not great. We did boost your economy when 10 of us went to a boot store and bought boots on the spot after we had landed here because we were freezing. The New Hampshire cold is mentioned many times in the book, but the most famous story is a pig roast in Meredith, New Hampshire on January 19th. I was there, so I remember, so was Risha. Bill was there speaking, and a group of travelers went to work. The high that day was 14 degrees, and the low was 5. To our surprise, when we arrived, we discovered that this was an outdoor function. So, with picnic tables set up, the pig roasting, and the only reason you could go inside was to use the bathroom. Well, there was a pig roasting, and there's a picture of it in the book, but there were icicles hanging down off of the pig roasting. Even if it had gotten cooked, we couldn't have eaten it because we could have never gotten our gloves off to do it. So we would do anything for a vote, standing out there doing that. I always say that New Hampshire is the pinnacle of presidential politics, and if you haven't been to New Hampshire, then you've never experienced a presidential campaign. I think that the New Hampshire primary is a must on any political junkie's bucket list. They've got to be here. You're also knowledgeable here about the candidates and the issues, and every traveler was so impressed by the people of New Hampshire and how seriously you take this and how you approach your primary. And we all hope to be back in 2016.
And now for the woman who has preserved this all for history. Copies have been given to the New Hampshire Historical Society, the Institute of Politics, and numerous other educational institutions. And those of you who are here who are representing an educational institution, I suggest you pick one up for your school's library. Brenda.
Now that you've heard both of them, let me tell you, you should understand the book's title a little bit better. It comes from a quote in the book about Sheila and the way she turned the Travelers into political magic. My own connection with Bill Clinton began when we were both 20-something. Older than you, probably. Right? We were living in Fayetteville. He was a brand new professor at the university's law school, and I was the newspaper reporter. Not the newspaper, but a newspaper reporter. We met at a trial that I was covering, and he had come to represent a friend. Now, what I remember from that meeting most is what this lanky, curly-headed future president was wearing. The most wrinkled, white linen suit you can imagine.
It's terrible.
That was 1972, and I still have that image locked in my brain from that day. About 2 years later, Bill called me to talk about running for Congress. We sat down for what was his first interview as a candidate for anything ever. It was the first of many political interviews we've done over the years. They were always long, and he always slipped into policy wonk mode, spouting statistics, and he was always late, for those of you who know him. I covered each of his Arkansas campaigns and his presidential campaigns at home, and I got to come to New Hampshire during that last critical week before your primary in 1992. Before then, I'll admit, I didn't much like the influence that the state had on the nomination process. But I learned what I suspect everyone who ever travels here in a presidential year learns. You earn the responsibility that goes with the first in the nation primary. I write about that every presidential year in my column, telling Arkansas voters to trust you, to narrow the fields for the rest of us. We'd be a lot better off. We'd be a lot better off if all voters were as informed as you. A great deal of my book is derived from the Travelers' New Hampshire experience. What I observed and how they developed strategies and techniques they'd use throughout the country. I might tell you that included taking full advantage of our southern drawls. Bill Clinton acknowledges he might never have been president if it hadn't been for his second place win here or without his Arkansas friends. He and they learned right here exactly what they were up against, and they figured out how to fight back. I have a lot of favorite stories in the book. One about the night the Travelers really let their hair down at a Chicago bar. Another about a frightening brush with death in Tennessee on a highway there. And this one from New Hampshire. At a senior center, a sobbing woman who said she couldn't afford both medicine and food collapsed into Bill's arms. Traveler David Matthews was with him when the story broke on national news, all the networks at the same time. Well, Bill, you're leading the national news. I can't tell if it's a good story or another sex scandal, but you're leading the news. Travelers weren't ordinary volunteers. They are intelligent, politically skilled people. Their specific talents proved invaluable in the campaign. In Atlanta, the day before the general election, Mayor Andrew Young yanked the Travelers off the campaign trail for a hastily called news conference. In less than an hour, the Travelers who could speak with authority prepared themselves and were on camera, refuting a derogatory ad that trashed our home state and the governor. Another time, Governor Clinton pointed out the head of the Arkansas Education Association at a forum here. That woman, he said, made my life a living hell, and now she's here supporting me. Peggy Neighbors was the woman, and she was there as an Arkansas traveler to validate his work for education reform, in spite of their strong differences over teacher testing. Often, when it came to the campaign field offices, the relations were rocky between the travelers and their staff members, the young, energetic campaign staff. These people seldom knew Clinton, but they thought they knew best how to campaign for him, certainly better than this bunch of people from Arkansas might. The national staff understood the travelers' value to the campaign, but the local staffs always had to be convinced. Patty Kreiner, who was one of the first 2 Arkansans to come here to join you folks, told me the staff just really didn't get it. They wanted to blow the travelers off. They were particularly upset with Sheila for pushing for more for the travelers to do. It got so bad that once, when Bill and Hillary were coming to town, the staff warned her, don't talk to Hillary about these conflicts. Well, Sheila didn't do that. She passed Hillary a note.
I didn't talk to her.
Well, Hillary intervened, and we don't know exactly what she said, but things changed. The book details how to parachute into any town with a van load of people and get the word out about your candidate. That's why Craig Smith called Travelers a campaign in a box. Smith was the campaign's national field director and later the White House political director. And if you read the book, you'll see that he was in on some of the earliest planning for this campaign. In New Hampshire in '92, when the national press was chasing Clinton and breaking news of the day, I was reporting on the travelers. It was a local story for me. I clambered in and out of a van with them as they worked in your neighborhoods, waved signs, pigeonholed voters on street corners, talked to the media, formed human rope lines on both sides at rallies, and did anything else they could think of to dig Clinton out of the hole he was in. Bill Clinton calls these people his friends of a lifetime. And the book will help you understand their passion for Bill and for Hillary. While it focuses on Bill's campaigns, it includes experiences from Hillary's 2008 race too, explores what went wrong and how the travelers adapted. To write this book, I interviewed more than 70 travelers and a number of other people as well, including several here. Sheila and her gang tracked down all but 5 of the 500 plus travelers who had gone somewhere 20 years ago. She found them. We sent them a detailed questionnaire, and amazingly, more than 65% of them responded. It's a wonderful response. Very quickly, I understood just how important the traveler experience had been to these people and how significantly they had contributed to Bill's election. Political Magic is the story of their historic, life-altering journey with Bill Clinton to the presidency and with Hillary Clinton in her first presidential bid. I assure you, if she runs again, the travelers will be right there with her. Some of them may need walkers, but they'll be there. And I hope to record that next chapter in traveler history. Thank you.
Now, if time permits, we're going to have a brief panel discussion between the panelists with regard to and I have a couple of questions that they haven't seen before, so it'll be interesting to hear the answers, and then we'll move to the president's speech. But Sheila, I'll start with you to give Brenda a bit of a rest. This book and what you did and what all the travelers did is really ultimately about grassroots politics, which I think a lot of people in this room and in New Hampshire take very seriously. What would be the top 5 pieces of advice you would give anyone, I don't care if they're 19 or 80, anyone trying to organize a grassroots campaign or participate in one? What would be the 5 tips from the master?
I don't know if I give you 5 tips.
All right,
but,
six then.
Well, yeah. You have to get committed people first off and get them out to say they'll go and do something and take the time to get out and do it. Once you get that, I do think it's sort of important to have some semblance of control, because if you let people just go out and do what they want, it's sort of why phone banking still works as a phone banking situation. Even when you bring your cell phones, you're all in one room together, because you get a sense of camaraderie. So I think you've got to get the people together, and we built such a team that helps. So building your team of volunteers is a big thing. When we were talking about this, we asked, Brenda asked the question to folks, do you think this would work again in this day and age? All of us, my age, said no, we didn't think so, because of social media and all the other things that were going on. All the young people that had been with us said yes, they thought it would work, because they thought that you needed to touch that again and have a little more of that individual get to know a person. But the whole thing, I think the big thing, it's not just what you do, it's getting the people together, organizing them, giving them something to actually do, making sure everybody has a job. Like when we would go out on the road, nobody just sat around. Somebody goes door to door, 6 of them are going door to door. One of them goes to the newspaper, one goes to the radio, the other one hits the businesses, they hit the town squares, and everybody's organizing what they do. And they didn't get to pick that. You do have to have, I think, a leader that decides who's going to go and what's going to do. And for the young people, we were talking about this in the reception, is get involved, volunteer for campaigns, go work a fundraiser. You can't afford to get in the fundraiser, but go work it. Because once you're in, nobody knows if you gave money or not. You're there working, you can go do it. And then you can meet everybody and you can talk to them. And that's how I started, and that's how you network. And that's how you get to know them all. And then they see you, they know your face, and it's a great thing to do. So being involved by volunteering is the biggest thing. I always say volunteer at everything. Volunteer to set up the tables, volunteer to do anything, as long as they'll give you a ticket to the event. Make sure they're going to let you in, and they will, because they need you. They need young people to do this. It's the best way, and they still need all of us to do it too. One of the things I've always said is I don't ever want to ask anybody to do anything I'm not willing to do myself. And so that's served me very well in doing that. So the big deal is volunteer, get involved, and do have somebody that gets it all organized. Somebody has to send out the emails and the tweets and the Facebook invitations, and you can't just have 5 different sources doing it. So there's a lot of organization, I think. Great, thank you. Brenda, you've known Governor Clinton for 40 years, I guess.
I have.
Or President Clinton. Many people here may not know that congressional race you interviewed him about, he didn't win.
He did not.
And he also didn't. He also lost his first bid for re-election as governor. And I'd be interested in your perspective, having covered him in politics for so long, as to why, in addition to the travelers and all of us wonderful folks here in New Hampshire that work so hard, there was something in him that refused to give up. The cycle before, then Senator Biden, now our vice president, withdrew from a race after some things had been thrown at him. 4 years before that, Gary Hart withdrew from a race. And can you tell us a little bit about what about Governor Clinton made him not quit in New Hampshire the way others had in the past?
I think he had invested so much, and these people had come here and invested so much as well, that he would have just done anything. He would work till the very last moment. But I saw that very early in his political life. This man would get up at 4 o'clock and be at the plant gates or whenever they opened, and he would campaign when he was running for Attorney General or Congress or for governor, and he would campaign from that hour in the morning all day long. He would make as many stops for interviews and or speeches as he could. He never ate. they were handing him something in the car between things so that he could eat. And then I did a lot of our interviews, those long, horrible interviews that sometimes got out of control in the middle of the night because we knew each other well enough that he could use the 2 to 3 hour moment to get an interview in.
2 o'clock.
Yeah, it was not uncommon for us to do that because I wanted a longer time with him so we could get into a lot of issues at once. And that was common. That's just the way he ran. The reason that he ran again after the congressional race is that he showed promise. He was running against a very popular incumbent, John Paul Hammerschmidt, and he showed strongly enough that people said, pay attention to this young man. He may do something else. And 2 years later, he ran for Attorney General and won. And 2 years after that, he ran for governor and won. And he got a little cocky, at least from the voters' perspective. And they decided he didn't need to go back the second term. And it was over car tags and Cubans, as I recall. He had raised the license fees and agreed to let Cubans come into the Fort Chaffee base there, and it was just too much for the Arkansas electorate at the time, and they just taught him a lesson, weren't going to let him go back. But then he worked like the Dickens to get back in the office, and then stayed there for 12 years altogether, I think. It's just in his nature. It's just the way he works.
Thank you. Great answers, both of you. And Sheila is going to just tell you a little bit about the context of what you're about to see.
In January, as I've alluded to, we had a 20th year reunion to celebrate the 20th year of this inauguration of Bill Clinton. You celebrate 20 years of everything. We celebrate 20 years of when he announced, 20 years of when he was inside, it's 20 years of everything. Good time for a party. So hundreds of travelers came back to Little Rock for the weekend, and the president came and spent the entire weekend with us. It was fabulous. We had a great time. We had a big exhibit that went up at the library on the travelers because all of us had saved in our attics all of this stuff, and stuff we now understand it happens to be valuable. What would you call it, Neil? Stuff is now artifacts, and it's valuable, but we didn't know it was junk. Richard just wanted it out of the attic. So now it's all in the archives. And we had a big exhibit for that, and we celebrated the release of Brenda's book. And at that reunion, just a little aside, the wonderful folks here, our friends in New Hampshire, presented to the Presidential Library in Little Rock a granite bench that has been placed on the grounds of the library, and there's some pictures of it here, and it said, dedicated to the Arkansas travelers with gratitude for their efforts in New Hampshire from fellow Clinton supporters in the Granite State. And it is prominently placed right next to when you're walking into the library. So it's great. I love it. And the president loved it. Everybody's very moved by it. Well, at this event, he was supposed to speak for a few moments, and, as he is always supposed to do, just a few moments. Well, he spoke for a lot longer than a few moments, and he gave some excellent remarks, very eloquent, on Klan and community. And we are showing you, it's never been seen before, only the folks in Little Rock saw it that January day, and we're going to show you a fairly lengthy clip from this with the president's remarks at that event. So, and we ought to move down here.
Should we move, Ann?
So,
No?
are we okay?
Okay.
Okay. I don't want to block anybody's
Yeah.
view. I think we should.
No, it's not behind us. There are two, I think. So maybe it works.
Happen to be. And that is because, starting really with the controversies that began to divide America in the 1960s, politics, which has always been a tough game, but became more of a blood sport that often looked more like a cartoon than a reflection of real life, real disagreements, and real issues.
I'm going to have to move. I can't do this.
And the bigger America got and the more media became important, the further national campaigns got away from the kind of things we took for granted, all of which Brenda documents so beautifully in this book. And I had a lot of sympathy with the national media because it's a lot of trouble to cover all these interesting stories. And it's a lot easier if you got to file a story every day to decide in advance what the storyline is and then just shoehorn the facts into the storyline. If it doesn't happen to be the real story, well, that's unfortunate. And from 1968, certainly by 1972, and certainly after Watergate, all the way until 2008, the storyline was always get the president or get a candidate, decide which one you are. It matters if you knock them out. The Arkansas Travelers declined to go along. They believed the story was more important than the storyline. And none of it would have happened if it weren't for this unbelievable person here who was my neighbor for a couple of years when I was Attorney General. We lived around the block from each other. We became friends. I was an officiant at her wedding in 1989.
I think we're going to have to leave it.
There was a surprising number of members of the legislature who became members of the Arkansas Travelers, which was...
Hey.
There was I'll say more about it in a minute, but I got my VVIP joke name tag, and it says, Bill Clinton, I'd do it for you, because in '92, they had a saying when everybody said, what are you doing here freezing yourself to death in New Hampshire? He said, he'd do it for us, you know? And I love that. And I always believed it until I read Brenda's book. I'm not sure I would have done some of that stuff for you. I don't know. But I thank you. I want to thank David and Barbara Power, who are out of the state. They were faithful in New Hampshire. And David Pryor gave a little talk when our volunteers in New Hampshire were about to go to work. And it's really the only piece of political philosophy reported in Brenda Blagg's book. And I think it's important for today. Because he said, look, New Hampshire is a lot like Arkansas. It's small and personal contact's important. You know, it used to be if I'd go way out in the country somewhere, 10 miles on a dirt road, if I shook hands with somebody, they'd vote for me because there hadn't anybody been there. And I actually shook hands with the guy, and I asked him if he'd met any other candidates. He said, yeah, I met Senator Harkin. And I said, did you decide to vote for him? He said, no, he's only asked me once. So I'm not making that up. But anyway, David Pryor said to our people, said, look, it won't matter to these voters that you know Bill Clinton and that you've known him for years and your kids have grown up together and you've been to softball games with him and soccer games and all that sort of stuff. But keep in mind, our politics are rooted in the traditions of the Scots-Irish immigrants to America, and they're based on clan, where family and friends, the people you know, are everything. In New England, it's somewhat different because they're based on people coming to America to establish self-governance in communities where people meet together, are used to having their say on decisions, but the issues really do matter a lot to them because they have to debate them in community forums. So you got to know his stance on the issues, and you got to give us feedback. And the reason I say that's important is that the truth is most all of us have a little bit of clan and a little bit of community in us. And the unresolved debate between clan and community is at the heart of so much division in America today. And a lot of the political media is always trying to drive that divide as hard as it can. Even if you might agree with those guys, they ain't us, you know, they're not part of us. New Hampshire was small enough and Arkansas was small enough that you could be proud of your clan and still be part of a community. That's what America's got to do again, to meet these challenges. And that's what we learned to do, all of us, in New Hampshire. That was the gift New Hampshire gave to me, to my great friend David Matthews, who repeatedly introduced me in his funny little hat, which he swears he still has, and to all the Arkansas travelers. I thank Terry and Alice and Risha and Deb and Nancy and all the people from New Hampshire who are here and all the ones who couldn't be here, because they enabled me to run a race like I would have run it here, and to find a person, often a kid, that reflected something I cared about that was animating this race. And I just can't tell you, you know, I'm still, New Hampshire works because it is a Democratic small d. That's the difference in a primary and a caucus. Everybody gets to show up, and you don't have to be somebody, even if you work at night, you can show up. Even if you got kids to work at, you can show up. You just show up and you have your say. And I never will get over what they did for me. We went from low 30s, we were sinking like a rock, we were headed down to single digits, and they turned it around in a matter of days. And I'd never seen anything like it, but I was sure it could happen there because of the intense personal nature of the campaign. And then when Hillary ran in 2008, they did something even more unbelievable. There was a big fight and squabble about who got to go first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Do you remember that? All the states were fighting. And the Democratic Committee decided that they would front load it with all these caucuses and mix them in with all the deal. And so New Hampshire moved up closer to Iowa, which is great if you win Iowa, because the national media publicity out of Iowa for the last 20, 30 years has given an 18-point boost in the New Hampshire polls to whoever wins Iowa, just because it's wall-to-wall coverage. But it's always had time to settle down in New Hampshire when there was almost 2 weeks between Iowa and New Hampshire. This time there was 5 days. And the campaign really began with the debate on Saturday night. Hillary was 13 points down. Everybody said she'd be lucky not to lose by 10 points. She never ran a single negative ad and won the state by 3 points. I have personally never seen a 16-point turnaround in 2.5 days with positive ads. And it's because of the way New Hampshire works. You know, the average House district in New Hampshire is like 2,500 people or something. And you had the Speaker of the House was a woman, the head of the Senate was a woman. Now everybody, you can't get elected if you're a man in New Hampshire. We're going to have to find a gender discrimination suit against them now up there. Even the Republicans won't vote for a man anymore. But it was amazing because all these legislators actually knew virtually all of their voters. I never saw anything like it. I have physically never, but I know this. It is a good thing that someplace in America, people still relate on a human, personal level and to the people they represent. It is a good thing that they know the names of the people who don't vote for them. And they remember their people too. Their kids get sick, or they have trouble in school, or they get in a car wreck, or they've got an autistic child. They know it is real, it is flesh and blood. It's not some attempt to shoehorn a complicated world into a two-dimensional cartoon. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I am grateful for what the travelers did throughout America to go up and say, now, I know this person, and I've known him for years, and I know this, that, and the other thing. And then if they want to talk about issues, you could talk about that. But it was really interesting reading Brenda's book, seeing when they went from place to place, the people that wanted to know where I stood on the issues, and the people that just wanted to know what kind of person I was. The Klan and the community. The travelers managed to do both. And for that, I am extremely grateful. Americans have overcome so many of our prejudices. And I thank Brenda for writing about that in the book. We're not as racist or sexist or homophobic as we used to be. We don't have any bigotries left, except we just don't want to be around anybody that disagrees with us anymore. And so when you see all this stuff going on in Washington, it is really a reflection of people being thrown together who represent the arguments they're having at home only on one side or the other. So if you want Washington to work more like you think they should, the people you send to Washington have to come out of an environment where people have to navigate these things in the way we did in New Hampshire, in the spirit of the New England Town Hall meeting. You have to have an environment that allows you to be clannish, proud of your roots, proud of your race, proud of your gender, proud of your whatever it is, but still part of a larger community and thinking that we are going to go up or down together. And that's what I saw in New Hampshire. Once you get there, once you get beyond thinking you can define everybody in neat little categories, then you wind up making public policy based on human impact. So when you leave here tonight, I do think that I probably never would have survived New Hampshire and gone on if it hadn't been for all of you, both those of you who went for me and those of you who were already there. But if you think about what happened, it basically comes down to two things. There was a huge wave of interest in turning me from a three-dimensional person into a two-dimensional cartoon. And you said, I don't think so. I refuse. That is not the life I know. That's not the person I know. And there was a huge wave of interest in turning all these faces and dreams and hopes and problems and accomplishments into two-dimensional issues, and for them to be two-dimensional people too are just statistics. And you saw them whole. And that's what we need to do again. And the most encouraging thing to me, again, I will tell you, about all this sophisticated technology in this last campaign is that it gave us at least the chance to know enough about each other going in to begin to knit things back together again in a different world, a more sophisticated world, a world where there's not as many community newspapers, not as many community radio stations. But a 10-year-old can get on the internet and find out in 30 seconds things that a lot of us who are older had to go to college to learn. But you can also find out a lot of stuff that just ain't so. And so we have got to recreate that. We have got to be able to be part of our clan and part of our community. And we can't let each other be two-dimensional cartoons. We're not any of us. We're all people. We've had bad days and good days. But I think if you look at the results, it worked out pretty well for the American people.
Do we have some time? If anybody has a question they'd like to ask Brenda or Sheila about their experiences or the book, please go to the microphones.
Or just ask it now.
Okay, here we go. Oh,
Here we go.
I guess your talks were so extensively
So
good.
done.
Actually, Terry, I got a question.
All right.
I know. This is scary.
This is Sheila's husband, Richard
Yeah, I say
Bronfman.
this is really scary.
Everything's,
It's really scary, yeah.
now this one's, everything's fair, it's politics. All right. Terry, you mentioned when Bill came up here, it was 3% just recognition. Okay. What did you all recognize in Bill that got you on board
Yeah.
early on when you really didn't even know who he was?
Well, I can speak to this from one aspect. That I got to know him through as several other people, including John Broderick here, our former Chief Justice, got to know him through the Democratic Leadership Council. And the idea, frankly, that really drew me to his candidacy was something he campaigned on and actually when he was elected made reality, and that was the idea of national service, which became what's now known as AmeriCorps. The seed for that was a program called City Year that probably most people here have heard of. He truly believed in both rights but responsibility, that all citizens had a duty to give something back. And then once you got to know him, as Sheila sort of alluded to, he looks you in the eye and you feel like you are the only person on the planet. And he has an amazing ability to do that, and that is a talent that any politician would envy.
She is a question.
Okay, over here.
Hi. So, obviously, over the years, we've heard a lot of scandals, a lot of personal stories about Bill Clinton that maybe we didn't want to know about. How, as really close friends as you are, how do you handle all those stories that are coming out, or do they just not matter on your relationship with him?
I have a good friend who, we just got an email today that he just passed away today. And he used to say, hate the sin, love the sinner. And that was sort of in our deal. Bill was such it's your friend. And you give your friends a lot of breaks on a lot of things that they do. And I think we did the same thing with him. We've all made mistakes. I certainly wouldn't want my life torn apart like his has been, and wouldn't want to be out there. I couldn't take it. Hillary always says she has a really tough skin and just quit reading the newspapers. But I think that it's just like you just have to take it as friendship and know that it's going to come and that people are going to be flawed, and you pick the guy that's still got some really great talents and skills and cares about people, which that's Bill's greatest strength, is how much he cares about people, and it's always been evident in everything he's done. And he does that for us. I mean, he's everywhere for a friend. He's back even now, he's back at funerals, he's back at weddings, he's on the phone. Richard's brother and dad just passed away. He's calling him, he's doing stuff. I mean, he just doesn't forget. He stays right there with you, so.
Over here, Nancy.
Someone had asked how, I guess it was Richard was saying how people in New Hampshire came to commit to him. The Democratic Leadership Council was, from this left-wing, more radical Democrats' perspective, a conservative group. I went to one of the meetings and thought, oh dear, I'm more left-wing. But during the 1988 campaign, where all the activists had candidates, by the time there was the last Democratic National Committee meeting, state Democratic Committee meeting, chaired by George Bruno, who later became ambassador to Belize under the Clinton administration. And Governor Clinton came up to be like the keynote speaker at this particular meeting. This is 1988, and it was a time of the season when everybody already had somebody else's button on, and I was a Biden supporter, and there were 8 other, I think, candidates going. And Bill Clinton came up, and I'll always remember, I saw him running up the stairwell with a bunch of friends, including Alice Chamberlain, whom I'd gone to law school with. And I thought, this is just so weird. What is Alice doing running upstairs with all these guys from Arkansas and knowing them? And it turned out that that is why I got involved. That I met him at this meeting. He laughed at my jokes. He asked if it was too late to run for president, and I thought he really meant to take the advice I was giving him, that yes, it was, because he does give that aerobic handshake. He takes your right hand in his right hand, he puts his left hand on your shoulder, he stares into your eyes, and he will make you do whatever it is he wants. It is a total fabulous personal relationship. And so when the subsequent years when I got the call, he's running for president, would you be on board, from my friend George Bruno, with the exception of 2 questions. I needed to know his position on abortion and his position on nuclear power, because I'm pro-choice and anti-nuke. George said, call Little Rock. And when I called Little Rock headquarters on my long-distance dime, back then long distance was expensive and it mattered, Sheila Bronfman answered the phone. And she goes, oh, it's somebody from New Hampshire. It's somebody from New Hampshire. And Sheila got on the phone, and I asked her those 2 questions. She gave me the answers. And then I asked her, why do you support Bill Clinton? And she started telling me the story, which became the story of many of the Arkansas travelers, her personal relationship with the governor. And if you figure that if you know somebody since kindergarten or college, like Alice did or something, and those people know your good points, your bad points, your strong points, your weak points, but if they're still your good friend, in a small neighborhood kind of sense, they know you and they still love you and they admire you, that's a big selling point, I think, for grassroots politics. And it allowed me, who didn't really know him, to personally commit to that campaign. I was in, and once you're in New Hampshire, you got the candidate's badge on you. It's sort of like, it's your team, and you're going to go into the trenches, and we did. But it was Sheila's remarks to me that mattered, because she knew him, and I think that is the strength. And you know what? I don't know if it's possible to do for a candidate again either, but I think it might be by using social media to tell those personal stories. And I think it'll work for Hillary next time out.
All right. Any other questions? Any from the students? No? Okay.
Thank you very much. We've enjoyed being here, and we're going to be around if anybody has anything else you want to say, but we sure have enjoyed it. Thank you. Oh.